Amen. My side of the family, and some on Amber's side, Amber as well, we are all scuba divers. And so from time to time, I tell you a scuba diving story. And my father was updating us on a story when we were visiting him over spring break. He's up in the Charleston, South Carolina area, and a pastor up there. And we were visiting with him, and the story, we were taking the kids actually downtown Charleston, and we were talking about the old artifacts we were going to see in one of the museums there. And the story of one of his artifacts came up. On a scuba diving journey somewhere in the Caribbean, he and a friend were there, and he spotted a glimmer, a shine there on the coral reef. And he and his friend both sort of made a swim towards it underwater, but my father got there first, and this ended up being a little bit of a point of contention, but he gathered up this old coin, this rare coin, and immediately he saw on it the date, the 1646, I believe, and man, his heart was racing. They went to the surface. His friend was like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I saw that thing, and we saw it at the same time, and my father was like, yeah, but I got there first kind of thing, right? Bragging rights right away. And they went and they got on the dive boat, and they asked the dive master, he said, how could this just be laying out there on the reef? And this was not long after one of the hurricanes had come through, and the dive master said, well, there's so many wrecks in these parts and in these waters that it's not uncommon that if a hurricane's gone through, it can really churn up the ocean, and something can be kicked up and then resettled, and what a find. My father has held on to this coin for, 5 to 10 years now. He's had it a long time. And in his church, he had a man coming to church, and he got to know this guy, and this guy was a coin collector. And like the real deal. I mean, huge collection of coins, knew his stuff. And my father said, hey, listen, I've got this coin. They looked at it, and he said, I'd like to sell it. I mean, I'm not a coin collector. I'd like a coin collector to have it, and I'd like to have a real treasure, something I can spend something on or do something with. And they would search for the values, and maybe anywhere from, $800 to $1,500. I can't remember exactly, but it was a good chunk of change. And my father said, man, how do I sell this thing? Asked the coin collector. Coin collector said, what you need to do, anybody who's going to pay that kind of money for a legitimate coin, and you need to get it authenticated. You need to have it authenticated. Now, they'd already done a little bit of research about this coin. It's called a siege coin. And it's a coin that they printed in England in this period of the 1600s when England was at civil war with itself. And one faction of the Civil War was under siege. So they melted down their silver cups and their goods to print money so they could continue to operate while under siege. And so this is a siege coin from the British Isles, from England. And so my father said, we'll do it. So the man said, listen, there are 2 reputable places. There's one in Florida. I think it's Tallahassee. I don't remember for sure. There's one in Florida, and there's one in California. And these 2 places are the best authenticators for the entire United States. This is where everybody who's anybody sends their stuff. And you're going to have to send it to them. You're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to wait. And you're going to have to get the results back. And then once it's authenticated, you could sell that thing. You can list it and try to find a buyer on the market. And my dad said, great, let's do it. Let's invest. So he sent this thing to Florida to be authenticated by the professionals. We were in the car driving in the van. And my father's getting more and more excited as he tells this story again and again. I've heard this story like several times about finding the coin. Like, we're like, all right, Dad, we know how you found the coin, okay? And he's getting more and more excited. But this time the excitement has a little bit of frustration with it. A little bit of nervous antsiness with it. And he says, we got the authentication back, and show him the next photo. Not genuine. Not genuine. He had the bragging rights. He had the story. He had the discovery. He had the coin itself, a rare siege coin, and hopefully he was going to have $1,000 for this coin. All of it, worthless. I laughed at him We just laughed. I laughed. I said, that's the greatest story I've ever heard. It's almost better that it's a fake than if it were real. In the end, and we discussed, well, why would it be a fake? Why would it be that somebody makes such a rare fake coin? And we were talking about the nature of scuba diving, and sometimes these dive shops will hold what they called hunts, Easter egg hunts, at various times of the year, and especially around Easter. And they'll plant a bunch of things that divers can pay, and they can enroll in the dive shop, and they can go on the hunt, and they can find things. So maybe they win like a free mask or scuba mask. And I thought, what if somebody, two ideas, what if somebody had bought this at a tourist shop and just tossed it overboard and thought it would be funny if somebody found it, and you were the brunt of their long con, right? Maybe that's true, but maybe a better option is one of these dive shops had a bunch of fake coins made and threw out there for divers to try to find. He's like, yeah, because it was kind of odd. It was like right on top of the reef. And you're thinking, how come nobody's found this thing before? I mean, this is a dive spot. Whatever the case, in the end, the fraudulent, the fake, the thing that was fabricated for cheap thrills, that metal coin cost far more than it was worth. It cost a little bit of reputation. It cost the $100 he had to invest to get it authenticated, which didn't work out. He's like, man, I'm end up in the hole on this one, Chad. I thought I was coming out way ahead. Cost the emotional disappointment, that little feeling of emptiness on the inside. There was no true satisfaction attained by the coin except for the ridicule of his family and the ridicule of his diver friend. This is the exact problem with humanity. We tend to place our hopes in empty versions of the real thing. We tend to displace or replace God with fabrications of human imagination and human idea and human desire. And these fabrications, these man-made things or ideas, we give our attention to, we give our concern to, and ultimately we give our worship to. And in the end, no different than this coin, when God is replaced, we suffer. We could say it this way: we suffer loss when we displace or replace God with a fraud. Whether that fraud is a real thing, as we're going to see in Exodus 32 today, or whether that fraud is the imaginations of mankind and the false beliefs of mankind. In the end, it's us who suffer loss. I want to take you to Exodus chapter 32. It's one of the most famous stories in the scriptures. And as we turn there, we're going to be there all morning. We got a lot to read, and that's a good thing for us. I mean, reading the scriptures is a good thing. And as you're turning to Exodus 32, I want you to remember what's taken place so far in the story. So far, God has delivered the people powerfully and miraculously. He has come down, He has heard their calls for help, and He has set them free from slavery in Egypt. And the people, with the leadership of Moses and with Moses as a mediator, they have entered into a covenant relationship with God. The people have heard the laws of God. Twice, Moses goes over these laws with them. Yes, we will do, they say. We will agree. We'll be the people of God. And we'll follow God's ways and laws. And they've entered into this special covenant relationship with God. They've heard the words of the law. And now Moses is up on the mountain. And the people, think about this, they've seen the presence of God journey with them. They can see the presence of God up on the mountain, and Moses is up there, and Moses has been finalizing the plans for the tabernacle. And if you were here 2 weeks ago, we looked at the tabernacle, and we looked at these magnificent, wonderful plans. The plan for God to dwell in their midst was through the tabernacle. through the people and their access with the priesthood and with the Aaron and the Levites. Moses is right there getting the plans. And the author breaks from that story of the tabernacle to tell this story. And he breaks from that story because these things are happening simultaneously. And it's maybe a little strange if you're reading through Exodus. You get like 5 chapters on the tabernacle, and then there's a break to this golden calf incident. And then after the golden calf incident, it goes back to 5 more chapters on the tabernacle. And that break is very important. It seems like a detour from what we're learning about the tabernacle, but it's put there on purpose so that we can compare and contrast true worship with false worship. The true access to the presence of God that God was giving them through the tabernacle with false access to God's presence, with fraudulent, fabricated ways to God. Throughout this chapter and throughout biblical history, the idolatry of the golden calf is known as the great sin. That's an official title for this moment. The great sin. And the sin at the mountain is one of the great examples. It's almost like the sin in the Garden of Eden, mankind's first sin. It is an incredible example of the nature of sin, and it gives us a pattern, a paradigm of the negative patterns of sin that will continue to plague Israel and to plague humanity. I would love to just focus on the nature of idolatry because the theme of idolatry in the scriptures is really, really interesting all by itself. But we're going to take a little bit broader view this morning and look at this great sin and discuss why is this called the great sin? What is God trying to tell us about our loss and about being displaced and about the fraudulent nature of sin? 4 things this morning. Number 1, first of all, we learn about the deception of sin. We learn about the deception of sin. Exodus 32 and verse 1. Let's begin reading. You know, in order to know what is true, sometimes you have to pause and take a look at what's false and how we're deceived. Does that make sense? And that's exactly what this chapter does. Exodus 32 and verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron, and they said to him, "Up." Man, the language of this chapter is just incredible. God has been telling them, hey, I'm going to bring you up out of Egypt, and I'm going to bring you up to the mountain. And here's the people in their deception. What's the command they give Aaron? Up. Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, this man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, I mean, come on, he brought us up this far. But come on up, Aaron, we got to get going here. We do not know what has become of him, Moses. The people were enticed right away. This very first couple verses in the chapter tell us exactly what's going on. The people are being enticed into sin. And what sins what are they doing? They're breaking the very first 2 commandments that they have learned and they have committed to before God. They're breaking right away. We see they're going to break the commandment of obeying the Lord and serving him. But how? They make this golden calf. They're breaking the commandment, which says, do not have any other gods before you. They're breaking the commandment, secondly, which says, don't make any graven image. Don't make anything as an object of your worship in my place. And so we see right away, knowing their heart to have gods that will go before us, there is a breaking of the law. And this is the nature of sin. And the New Testament says sin is law breaking the laws and the demands of God. And we learn already something about each and every one of us. We fall into sin when we do not do what God tells us to do. We fall into sin. We're deceived by sin when we go away that God has told us not to go. How are these people deceived? Think with me very carefully. How do they have this desire? Where did it come from? They are beginning to sense a spiritual void. Notice the language. Moses is up there on the mountain, and he's been a long time. And God, they're thinking, is up there with him. And we've got to go to this place. We've got to go to the promised land. But if Moses is there and we don't know he's coming back down, and this God that has saved us is up there, maybe they're staying there. Maybe they're not going with us. What's God doing right now? He is giving Moses the plans for how he's going to go with them. He is giving them the plans for the tabernacle. And when God's right there preparing to go with them, to go into battle, to go into the journey, to walk with him and to be present among them, they're sensing a spiritual void. And they're sensing, hey, our mediator's not here. Hey, where's this God? When are they coming? And they're growing impatient with God's ways and with God's plans. And this impatience, they are saying, we got to find something to fill this hole as we go forward. So make us gods who will go before us, who will be the gods that we take into the promised land, the gods that we go into battle with, the gods that journey alongside of us. Give us something, Aaron, to know that we're not alone. In the absence of Moses, in the absence of this God. Listen, it's very deep in the heart of mankind to have a desire of something or someone to look up to trust in, to worship, to depend on. That need deep in our hearts and souls for protection and security and certainty is a God-given need. It's a God-given desire, but it's supposed to be directed towards the Lord himself. God, we trust in you. We know that you're with us. We know that you won't leave us or forsake us. We know that you've promised your presence to go with us. And what happens is when we begin to look away from our source, our true source, we begin to search for other things or ideas or people or something to fill the hole. And so it's led them to a misplaced worship and a fraudulent faith. Listen, people today will still give their worship and place their faith in something. Everyone is placing their trust and their faith in their future for or in something. The question is what or who? Verse 2. More about that in a minute. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hands, and he fashioned it with a graving tool. And he made a golden calf. We don't have a lot of time for this morning, but why a calf? In the ancient world, calf images were everywhere in every kind of false religion, from Egypt to all the religion of the ancient Near East. And so this was just something that was almost automatic for them to default to. Verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, listen to this is mind-blowing. Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh. Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. It's almost as if Aaron names the golden calf Yahweh. If you'll remember back last year when we studied the name of God and how holy and sacred and powerful it is. Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh. Verse 6, and they rose up early the next day, and they offered burnt offerings, and they brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink. What did we learn about sitting down to eat and drink? When they sit down to eat and drink with the Lord, it's covenant language. It's relationship language. And in this passage, verse by verse, almost phrase by phrase, we get pictures of what was supposed to be for Yahweh, the one true God, distorted, and the same actions, the same things used in a false way. Look at it, the people. Think about the people for a minute. They're supposed to bring an offering of their silver, their gold, their plunder from Egypt to the Lord to make a tabernacle. So right here, there's a false offering, isn't there? They're giving, but to the wrong thing, to something false. The tabernacle is supposed to be the place that will assure them of God's presence. But the people have said, no, we want our own place and we want our own way to know that Yahweh's with us. Aaron is supposed to be the authorized priest serving in the tabernacle. Instead, Aaron becomes a fraudulent priest to serve fraudulent gods. This whole set of verses is priestly language, only directed towards the wrong thing. The people are supposed to know Yahweh brought us out of Egypt. And what do they begin saying? Hey, it's these gods who brought us out of Egypt. The altar is supposed to be in the tabernacle before the dwelling place of God to cleanse the people of sins as they approach the presence of God. And yet here is a false altar, fraudulent, built before a false God. The people are supposed to, commanded to, celebrate feasts for the Lord. And what do? They throw feasts, religious feasts, for a fake. Every action is a false version of the real thing. Every action. Listen to me carefully. Humanity still does this today. With our trust, with our hopes, with our desires, with what who we look to meet our needs. Listen to me very carefully. The Israelites were given very good things. The feast were a good thing. The altar was a good thing. The opportunity to celebrate before the Lord and to have a priest was a good thing. And yet what sin does is it takes good things that are given to us, that are God-given things, and it twists and it distorts so that we put our hope and our trust in those things instead of God. And in our own ways instead of God's ways. And we are supposed to find fulfillment, find joy, find purpose, find intimacy, find belonging, find this place of acceptance, find our hopes and our desires and our dreams in the Lord first. What happens when people begin to serve themselves and when they begin to say, I want my own way and not God's way, they begin to find their fulfillment and their joys and their intimacies in other things. And what happens? We see, for example, people finding their fulfillment and security in social media, don't we? Such a small thing. Such a small thing. But when our hearts and our affections begin to turn towards what others think about us, aren't we making the same error? We see, don't we, in the world today, when we're supposed to have intimacy with the Lord first and know faithfulness to Him first, and then God gives us a spouse or gives us relationships with our family as a reflection of intimacy and a reflection of faithfulness. We see people trading in faithfulness and true intimacy for sexual thrills, don't we? Every single day. And for what is fraudulent, every day. We're supposed to find our joy and our purpose ultimately in the Lord. And in reflecting the Lord is going to give us joy, fulfillment, purpose in this life through the world around us. But what happens is people will substitute the joy and the purpose and fulfillment in the world around us and put it in the place of God. So instead of God first, God in the highest place of the throne, it becomes my fulfillment is in my next adventure or my next weekend or my next thing with my friends, my next live life to the fullest. We'll hear in the commercials and in the media. Take advantage of life. Seize the day. Seize the moment and you'll be satisfied and you'll be fulfilled. No, we're to seize the Lord and then the Lord fulfills us in our moments. And we could go on in this kind of a list. Every action was a false version of the real thing. When I was a kid, I loved it when a relative or a grandparent would surprise me with like a gift and something they had set aside for us as kids. And I'll remember that there was a moment where my grandfather, he knew I was like collecting some rocks and I had some things from here and there. And he says, hey, I've got something for you. And he gives me, I don't know if his grandpa was a relative. My memory gets hazy. But they placed that rock in my hand. And I was holding on to that thing. And man, it felt so weighty. It felt so good. It was so shiny. And no sooner did I get the words out of my mouth, man, Grandpa, is this gold? This thing is awesome. I'm going to be rich. Woohoo! As soon as I said that, he said, no, Chad, this is not gold. If it were gold, I wouldn't be placing it into your hands. No, Chad, this is not the real thing. This is called pyrite. Anybody have any pyrite at the house, or your kids have got a little pyrite? I think we've got some at the house somewhere. This is pyrite. It's called, anybody know the nickname for pyrite? Yeah, fool's gold. This is fool's gold. And I had a good chunk of it growing up. And I remember just looking at it, I think, boy, I wish this were real gold. Just thinking that as a kid, it's pyrite, but man, I wish it were real gold. Pyrite is called fool's gold because it has the same basic look and the same basic weight as the real thing. And even though it seems the same, there are several key differences between pyrite and the real thing. With pyrite, the flecks of mineral are very flaky, but they're not strong at all, and they don't handle heat very well. But with the real thing, those little nuggets or those little flecks, even though it almost has the same color, it almost has the same weight, it almost has the same look, it responds differently to heat. It can be molded, shaped, and it can be bound together in new ways, new forms. There's another key difference between pyrite and between the real thing. Miners would know this in the days of mining. Pyrite is always found very close to real gold. They're developed in the same geometric places. Geometric's not the right word, but you get it. Rocks. I lost the word there. They grow in the earth in the same locations. There you go. And it's taken this name, fool's gold, because a miner who has a trained eye would know, oh, I've hit pyrite here. This is a vein of pyrite, and I need to keep digging. But the foolish miner would hit the pyrite, stop digging, stop the work, stop the effort, stop moving forward, and go and get this stuff checked out, only to find it wasn't the real thing. He needed to keep digging further. The fool's gold is close in location to the real thing. Think about it with me. The people are right there at the foot of the mountain. They're close to the real thing. Moses is receiving the instructions for the presence of God to dwell among them. But the people wanted God's presence on their own timing, in their own ways, and on their own terms, based on their own ideas, to be satisfied ultimately with a falsehood, with a reflection, with idolatry. This was the deception of sin. In verse 7, it says, and the Lord said to Moses, go down for your people, whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt. Notice God has begun to distance himself from the people. The question is, who's bringing us up? God has been saying, I brought them up. The people have said, these gods are bringing us up. God says, okay, Moses, you brought them up, man. These guys are duds. Go down for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt. They have corrupted themselves. Pay attention to the language. Verse 8, they have turned aside quickly out of the way of what I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf, and they have worshipped it and sacrificed to it. And they have said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. What would become of their foolishness? Number 2, the disaster of sin. Number 2, the disaster of sin. The people have corrupted themselves. This same phrase is used in the days of Noah. When describing the people around Noah's life, it says they were utterly corrupt. They were wicked in every single way. How many of you know what happened to the people of Noah's day? It's the same language. It's no wonder then we see a similar response from the Lord about these people and their wickedness. Look at verse 9. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen these people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you, Moses. To be a stiff-necked people is farming language. It's describing an oxen who won't take on the yoke of his master, and he stiffens up, and the master's trying to put that yoke on and lead this oxen into service for the farm, and the oxen is so stiff-necked and will not let the master get that yoke on. God says, these people are supposed to be my servants. I've brought them out to serve and worship me, and yet they will not take upon themselves my service. Notice, I know your eyes will be drawn to God's anger burning hot. But I don't want you to overlook, and let's show this verse again. Verse 10, God says, therefore, let me alone. Notice that as God's wrath is about to go forth, what is happening simultaneously? His holy presence is pulling back from the sin of the people. Sin separates us from God. And I would propose to you, as we read in chapter 32 and in the coming weeks and 33 and 34, this is the key issue. Will God go with them after this idolatry? Will his presence be with him? And this issue is an even greater disaster in the language of the scriptures. The withdrawal of the Lord's presence would have been equally as disastrous as his presence draws back as the fate of the people, the threat of his wrath against sin, and the removal of them away. The removal and punishment of sin away from God's holy presence. To whom much is given, much is required. Think about it with me, because the language is only going to get harder from here. It is shocking to us to think about God's wrath and holiness in this way, but it is true nonetheless. Think about it then with me. The people have been miraculously delivered. They've seen the great pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. They've heard the voice of the living God. The elders have gone up the mountain and they've peered into the heavens. They've received the holy law of God. They've been set apart as his covenant people. But the sin problem runs so deep in their humanity that perhaps besides all God has done for them, despite all God has done for them, God needs to start over and make a new man out of one man. And he says, Moses, I'm going to just start over with you. God had done that with Noah. Verse 11. But Moses implored the Lord his God. Now, some of what God is doing is he is drawing out the mediation of Moses. He is drawing out, and this is very significant. My kids would ask this question when we've looked at this story. Why was God acting like this? What is happening? Why does Moses seem like he's so noble here, but God seems like he's angry here? And I pause the kids. I say, listen, God is setting up an example for us in the life of Moses. Because Moses in this passage and in the next weeks is going to become the great mediator on behalf of the Israelites. And how many of you know we need an eternal Moses who will mediate for us, and his name is Jesus Christ. So God is drawing out this relationship. And so Moses implored the Lord his God, and he said, oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? Moses knows this, but he's beginning the process of mediation. You've brought them out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Look at what Moses says. Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them? To kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn away, Lord, from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember, Lord, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you've sworn by your own self, and you've said, I will multiply your offspring, Abraham, as the stars of the heaven, and all this land I promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster he had spoken of bringing on this people. Notice Moses' answer. It is humble. God says, Moses, I'm going to make a new man out of you. Moses doesn't say, great, do it. I'll make a great new patriarch. He says, no, Lord. No, it's Abraham. He deflects. Moses is such a humble and good and righteous mediator. He says, Lord, you've said you do it this way. And he appeals to God. He is able to meet the mediation needs on behalf of the people because he appeals to a merciful, relenting God. Moses calls upon the promises of God, the faithfulness of God, and the reputation of God to accomplish a stay of execution. I've got news for you today. The same tactics, the same abilities in prayer are yours before God. Because of our great mediator, Jesus Christ, the New Testament says we can approach the throne of grace boldly, and we can be mediators. We are a kingdom of priests, and we can say, God, when we're in the moment of our disaster, when we're seeing the disasters of sin take its toll on our families, on our workplaces, on our neighborhoods, on our cities, on our nation, we can say, God, you're faithful to your promises. Don't forget your promise that says I'm here, and I represent your presence to this situation. Don't forget your faithfulness, Lord, to me, and that the name of the Lord, I've called upon your name, and I know you, and I do serve you, Lord. I've not been stiff-necked. I've been humble before you, and we can, just like Moses, begin to appeal to God for his favor. And yes, the scriptures wants us to know that the wrath of God is a serious consequence for sin, but the scriptures also simultaneously want us to see God's willingness and compassion to relent from disaster in our lives. And we know that famous passage of scripture, that if my people will humble themselves, and how does it go? And pray and call upon my name, and turn from their wickedness, I will what? Respond, and I will heal their land. This is exactly what Moses is teaching us to do. It says, then Moses, we see God's grace moving. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain, verse 15, with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. Tablets that were written on both sides. On front and back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, or sometimes it says, and the writing was with the finger of God, engraved on the tablets. We see glimpses of God's grace, and we'll return to that in a moment. Nevertheless, sin must still be confronted. And Moses has a duty to do in confronting sin and bringing God's justice to the community. In this portion of the story, we'll hear the sights and the sounds and the actions of the people gone astray. And in Florida language, in spring break language, we might call this portion of the story spring break breakers gone wild, right? They would be making a video to sell of this for $19.99. The nations would be mocking. Verse 17. Joshua appears to have been with Moses on the mountain. It says, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, the noise and the wildness is so loud. He said, there's the noise of war in the camp. Are they under attack? Are they preparing for battle? Are they shouting, getting ready to fight? Moses said, that's not the shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear. It's the sound of a party gone wild. And as soon as he came near the camp and he saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. Notice how Moses is going to carry the Lord's anger with him towards sin. And Moses threw the tablets out of his hands, and he broke them at the foot of the mountain. This is an incredibly shocking scene described. In the language, We don't see it in the English, but the author of this book, Moses probably himself, has written this to give several clues to what is going on. And he uses certain letters again and again in the words that he chooses. And each of these letters reflect pagan gods and pagan practices. And so the author wants us to see that there are allusions here to the practice of idolatry in the ancient world, even allusions to temple prostitution that was so common in worship of these false gods of the region. It's no wonder God was angry. It's no wonder Moses is angry too. And he carries God's holy, righteous anger with him. And we see the smashing of the stones. What a dramatic moment. And we might be tempted to think then, well, this smashing of the stones, Moses lost his cool. He lost his temper, right? But I don't think that's the way the story presents it. The phrase great sin is a legal term. And it'll be used throughout the Old Testament when God is indicting the people with breaking law. And so we need to see this smashing of the law as a public, visible demonstration. You have broken God's laws right now. We see this kind of purpose in what Moses is doing in the verse that follows, verse 20. It says he took the calf that they had made and he burned it with fire, and he ground it into powder, and he scattered it on the water, and he made the people of Israel drink it. Yuck. Now, I couldn't help but think when I was a kid growing up, if we were getting sassy. How many of you know what happens in a house if you're getting sassy? Or you're letting a word slip? A lot of you are laughing. I don't know if they still do this these days, but they did it in those days. And my mom would threaten me, and she would say, you know, I'm going to wash your mouth out with a bar of soap. That's what you need, right? Now, fortunately, my mom never really followed through. But I've got this question for you. How many of you have really had a good chunk of soap in your mouth before? I mean, you've had that thing in your mouth. A lot of hands going up. A lot of hands. Okay. Praise the Lord, he saved you. you heathens out there. All right, I'm just teasing. Here Moses grinds up this idol and he puts it in the water and he makes him drink it. It's kind of a strange thing to us, but I wonder if an Israelite were here today and he walked into a household and there's a kid with a bar of soap in his mouth. In trouble. I know some of you are wanting me to do it, aren't you? You want me to just stick my teeth right on that thing. Oh man, I'm nervous because I would do it for you, but it might just mess me up so bad I'll be done preaching for the rest of the day. Like I've already got a sore throat. I don't want suds in my mouth too, and I'm spitting out bubbles. You won't learn anything else the rest of the day. But I could just imagine that soap sticking in your mouth, and what happens when it comes out? What is that? You're trying not to swallow. The saliva's building up. You're rushing to the sink. You're rinsing out. It's like, right? Did I get it right? Without me having to do that in front of you. That's good news. What does that do? It does a couple of things. It's a very symbolic thing. I mean, it doesn't really wash the heart. Soap in the mouth. It's supposed to say, hey, son, daughter, your mouth is dirty. It needs a cleaning. But it doesn't really fix the language problem, does it? Or the sassy problem. It's symbolic of a dirty mouth, isn't it? But it's supposed to leave an impression and an imprint. Never do this again. Never speak to me this way again. Never use that word again. It's supposed to leave a lasting impression, isn't it? Moses grinds up this calf, and he takes the ashes and he puts it in the water, and it's working on this similar level. It was very symbolic. May seem strange to us being in a different time and culture, but there's a place in the book of Numbers where if an adulterer is accused of adultery, they would bring the accused before the priest, and the priest would make them drink bitter water. Bitter water. And if the adulterer responded to it with sickness, then their adultery was confirmed and they were found guilty. Numbers chapter 5, you can read about it. They were found guilty. And so Moses probably has this idea in mind, and symbolically he's wanting to show them, listen, these false gods are annihilated. They're worthless. They're nothing. They've been utterly destroyed, and he's wanting them to have this thing in their lives that they have taken in to go, I don't want this in my life, and to get that reaction so that never again will they turn to idolatry. It's probably also working on a level, because in a few moments we're going to see that 3,000 are slain. And just perhaps this is a way they determined who was guilty so that the whole community wasn't facing the wrath of God. The purpose of the washing out of the mouth of soap is to emphasize certain things, and that's what Moses does here. He wanted to emphasize the complete destruction of these false gods, and he wanted to punish the Israelites by exposing their adultery. They were adulterers. They were unfaithful to God with the bitter waters. Number 4, last but not least, we turn to the damage of sin. The damage of sin. That was the demonstration of sin. We saw the breaking of the tablets and the mouths and the bitter water and the partying. Number 4, the damage of sin. Exodus 32 and 25, it says, and when Moses had seen that the people, when he saw the people had broken loose. It's a great phrase. When he had saw that the people had cast off restraint. Some of you will know other versions of the scriptures that what? Right. The people casting off restraint. When there is no vision, the people perish in some translations. I think in others, when there is no vision, the people cast off restraint. He saw the destruction, the perishing of the people because they had broken loose from the commands of God. They would not be subdued and serve the Lord. For Aaron had let them break loose to the derision or to the shame of their enemies. William Golding he writes an excellent book. It is a work of fiction. I would recommend it as a read because it looks at a group of British boys who are stranded on an island without leaders, without society, and it follows the destruction, the casting off of norms, the casting off of decency, the casting off of goodness, the casting off of love for your fellow man. And it traces these boys. The book is called Lord of the Flies. And as you study the book, the boys get worse and worse and worse. They're committing murder. They're partying. They're feasting. They're like these Israelites without restraint. Even in idolatry, they fall as they take a pig's head and they put it up on the spear as an offering to this imaginary being in the forest and in the jungle. They dance around that pig's head and they dance around the fires at night, and you see the decay. And Golding is a brilliant author because he was commentating on the decay of society, and even society without law, and even without the divine law, the laws and the morals of God himself. Verse 26, it says, then Moses stood at the gate of the camp, and he said, in this situation where everything's gone wild, he said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. And the sons of Levi, these would be the priesthood in the future, they gathered around Moses, and he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you. Go to and from gate to gate throughout the camp. And each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, today you have been ordained because they did a hard thing before the Lord. And they brought the Lord's justice to the most wicked of the perpetrators. He said, today you've been ordained in the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son. his brother, that he might bestow a blessing on you this day. And the next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sins. Why is there still more to this story to go? It's because we have not resolved the question of the Lord's presence. Will the Lord go with them or not? We have resolved that the Lord relents. He's compassionate and gracious and merciful. He does not wipe them all out, for they were all complicit in the sin. We have resolved that the Lord is still just, that there's always a price to pay. There's always a consequence for sin. Sin has damage to it. It brings damage into our life. And yes, more than 600,000 men and their families of the community would be forgiven the disaster of God's wrath, but there would still be the consequences and the damage of sin in the community. And the Levites would be these chosen priests who would take a stand for the Lord's justice on that day. But it wasn't without damage. It wasn't without consequences. And the community would suffer the damage of division, as perhaps brother would have to turn against brother to hold up justice and to hold up righteousness in the camp. And it would suffer the damage of lost lives and of fathers and friends and relatives. It would suffer the damage of the brokenness within the community itself. It would suffer the damage of the cost of these people and these men and these women who had devoted and led the nation astray. The consequences of sin were still there. And this is critical to remember throughout all of Scripture, that God is both loving and holy. He is both merciful and just. He is both willing to relent and a God of consequence. It is both and. And this is a hard note to end the message on. But it's the right note. Not every Sunday needs to be happy, happy, joy, joy. Some Sundays we need to feel the weight of who God is and his power. And we need to leave this place with a thoughtfulness and a reverence for Almighty God. We need to leave this place thinking, God, are there certain ideas, certain things in my heart, in my life that are idolatrous? The New Testament says these things were written down as examples and warnings for us. Why? Because these things that happened to them, they still happen today. I want you to stand with me and bow your heads and close your eyes.
Thank you for watching our video. If you liked it, share it with a friend and subscribe to our channel. We go live every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also support us by clicking the Give button. This allows us to continue to impact our community as well as help missions across the globe with the love of Jesus Christ. Thanks again for watching.